Okay, I look forward to meeting you all in due course and to hearing what everyone's got to say. I think we might start with Sarah, our fellow.
Great.
Matilda.
Yeah. Thank you, Yoriku, for that wonderful opening to our open forum. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this open forum on our think tank themes of war, conflict, and global migration. And I do want to reiterate Yoriku's remarks about the GRN as a community of emerging and early career researchers that share ideas, experiences, and expertise in order to support each other in our research practices and to work together to promote and create impactful research for policy change. And so this open forum really is an example of that collaborative and open spirit in practice. My name is Sarah Dem. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Law at the University of Technology in Sydney, and I'm one of the fellows in this think tank, together with Dr. Matilda Arvidsson, who is a researcher in the Department of Law at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Our think tank is also led by Junior Fellow Baba Daridi, who I will introduce in full shortly. As Yoriku mentioned, our think tank is a supportive and dynamic space for early career researchers to connect. We have monthly meetings where we discuss our shared research interests and evolving research projects. And to date, we've also had a skill-based writing workshop where members have been able to share drafts of their work in order to workshop them and receive constructive feedback. Of course, if anyone has any questions about the think tank specifically, please do feel free to ask them in this open forum as well, as we do plan to leave about 5 minutes at the end of our discussion so that you can ask those questions and to hear from you about possible future activities of the think tank. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge that I am zooming in from the unceded land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, that is the First Nations people who are the traditional owners over the portion of space that we now know as Sydney, Australia. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and commit ourselves to working towards Indigenous justice and decolonisation in the present. I also want to recognise the many places that you are all joining us from, and to acknowledge in particular the interconnected histories of these places that we currently live and work. So we'd like to pause for a moment in order to ask you to fill out an online poll so that we get a sense of who's joining us in our meeting today. So hopefully this will work. And I'll get Tom now please to launch the poll, and you should see it on your screen.
Is it coming up?
It seems it isn't coming up, and it seems like the technology might not be on our side today, which doesn't matter. So instead, what we'll do is we'll invite you, if you feel comfortable, to edit your Zoom name, and in brackets after your name, add a location so we get a sense of where you're joining us from today. So as you can see, this open forum really is an experiment in intellectual exchange, in creating online community, in using the dynamic format presented by Zoom to connect with like-minded researchers beyond our think tank. The themes of our think tank are also really pressing and critical for the 21st century. We need only think about the resurgence of international and internal borders in response to COVID-19 to get a sense of this. But there are, of course, many, many other substantive topics and methodological questions that touch on our think tank themes that we hope to explore in brief in today's open forum, and then take up in the think tank in our future activities. So let me provide a very brief overview of this event's format. So in order to kick off our discussion of the key issues of our think tank themes, we will hear from 4 members of our think tank, including our junior fellow, Bava. Each speaker will speak for approximately 3 to 5 minutes about their current research projects and interests, as well as some of the principles and approaches that inform their research. We'll then have approximately 30 minutes to hear from you about what you think the key issues of our think tank themes are, and to hear about some of the research projects that you're currently doing or intend to do, and how we might best represent these in the think tank's activities. Given it's an online platform, I just want to reiterate Yoriko's remarks about the form of engagement. So please do keep yourself mute during the panel discussion. After this, Matilda will facilitate the discussion, and we encourage you to use either the chat function or then the raised hand functions to indicate that you wish to participate, and then Matilda will then call upon you to invite you to join the discussion. We will have a progressive speaking list for the discussion, which means that we will prioritise people that haven't yet spoken, and preferably also scholars who are based in the Global South. So on that note, I would like to introduce our junior fellow, Bava Darani, who plans to commence a PhD next year on the colonial legal legacies in Singapore and Malaysia, with a focus on labour migration and the migrant worker community in Singapore. Over to you, Bava.
Hi, everyone. I just want to share a little bit about what I'm interested in, and hopefully we can discuss later. I'm interested in exploring labor migration between South Asia and Southeast Asia, and focusing on how race, gender, and caste impacted these migrations. And Singapore right now has about 1 million migrant workers on different types of visas that essentially are meant to differentiate them from citizens. And the COVID-19 crisis has only highlighted these hierarchies, as more than 90% of the COVID cases in Singapore is from the migrant worker community. And there have been ad hoc laws that have been passed that further curtail their rights and movement. So I wanted to understand how the modern migrant worker is constructed in post-colonial Singapore by doing a study of the colonial coolie figure in the region. So coolie is a word derived from the Tamil word for menial labor, and it's used to describe the many Chinese and Indian indentured laborers who were transported to various colonies following the abolition of slavery. And I would like to do a comparative study of this coolie figure with the modern migrant worker to better understand the precarious nature of labor migration that exists within the Global South. I'm especially inspired. Hello?
Sorry, Barbara, it sounds like we just lost you for a brief moment. So you were just saying you're particularly inspired by particular aspects of your research. So if you want to take it up there.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm especially inspired by critical legal theory, critical race theory, and third world approaches to international law. And I hope through my research, I can highlight how studying the legal history of Singapore and Malaysia is relevant in understanding how modern systems at the international and national level enable this human exploitation and making of precarious lives through legal status and nationality regimes. So yeah, that's just a brief overview and what I'd like to research on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bava. And that connects nicely with what our next think tank member will speak to. So I'd like to introduce Gabriela Diana, who is currently a migration researcher interning with the Organization for American States, and who is interested in understanding the context from which people migrate and the realities they face on their migration journeys, with a focus on Africa and Latin America. Thanks, Gabriela.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Gabriela. I'm from Brazil, where I'm currently based. I hold a bachelor's in international relations from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and a master's in ethnic and migration studies from Linköping University in Sweden. Right now, I'm also pursuing a postgraduate degree in international law, and hopefully in the future, a PhD in peace and conflict studies. As Sarah mentioned, I am interning with the Department of Social Inclusion at the Organization of American States, supporting the Unit on Refugees and Forced Displacement on its many activities in the context of the Americas, which has been a truly amazing experience. As of my research interests, I'm interested in understanding and analyzing from a historical and international relations perspective, the context from which people migrate, which many times are a context of conflict and war, at least the ones that I'm most interested about. And I'm also interested in analyzing the situations of human rights violations people may encounter and be subject to throughout their journeys, such as human trafficking, smuggling networks, contemporary slavery, and detention centers, and how these realities challenge, defy, and really violate their human security and rights. And I have focused my research on Africa, especially Libya, and Latin America. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Gabriela. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Stacey Johnson, who is a researcher from the UK, currently working in a university in Istanbul. Her research to date has mainly focused on education and linguistics, but she's recently begun to expand her research field to include studies on refugees from Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan, in particular with a focus on questions of post-conflict education and social inclusion. Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, wherever you are in the world. So I have two ongoing projects at the moment, and as Sarah said, can everyone hear me, by the way? Okay, because I'm in a cafe and I've had to put earbuds in and it's a little bit, I can't hear myself, but okay, as long as you can hear me. So the two projects I have ongoing at the moment, I'm trying my best to keep them in the field of education, but it's quite difficult, to be honest, because there's so many paths that I can take this down. So the first one I'm looking at is social inclusion of Syrian refugees in Istanbul in Turkey. And whilst there's a growing body of literature about the struggles and the plight of Syrians in this region, I'm trying to take a different stance at the moment. So we've been talking in the think tank a little bit about positionality, and when I've reflected on my positionality as a white British female with limited Arabic skills trying to access participants in this area, it's also made me realise that there's a niche group of people who are more than willing to be in touch with me. And these are the English-speaking, educated professionals who've left Syria to develop their careers in Turkey, and hopefully in the aim of getting citizenship here. So this has led to a different project that I initially started with, but however, I think it will be more fruitful in the end. And this is looking at sort of the success stories from the original group of Syrians who joined after the start of the civil war back in 2011, and who've been here all along, and they've made a real success story for themselves. So this is one of the projects. The second project is, again, with social inclusion, looking at the different activities and support networks that are available here for Syrian refugees in Istanbul. And I've actually just left a meeting from one of the projects, Knit Istanbul. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of it. It's a small group, a small NGO, where Syrian women are making a living from knitting products for customers all over the world. And what started with a very small initiative has gone from strength to strength. And now they have, they did have an Etsy page, which was closed down, but they have a small business ongoing where local Syrian ladies are able to get a small amount of money through knitting and selling these products in the community and internationally. So I'm looking at interviewing these ladies and finding more about what their barriers to social inclusion are and whether these sort of initiatives are really working for them. So yes, I think that's everything from me. I'm glad to be part of this think tank and welcome everybody, and I look forward to the discussion we can have later.
Fantastic, thank you, Stacey. And our final member to speak today is Anissa Avedia, who is a research and policy professional writing on the topics of social inclusion, humanitarian diplomacy, and international development. Anissa is currently a graduate student in migration studies at the University of San Francisco and also a GRN board member and think tank coordinator. Over to you.
I forgot to mute myself. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon. Really appreciate your participation. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that my research is informed by not only my own lived experience, but it's also been shaped by the refugees I've worked with and that I've met over the years. And it's also shaped by my professional experience in the field of US Syria policy and humanitarian diplomacy. I first came to migration studies in the summer of 2015, standing in the middle of a makeshift refugee camp in Belgrade, Serbia. And as I stood there amongst this mix of people from so many different places, genders, ethnicities, and religions, I stopped and I had to ask myself, why are so many people migrating? So many people from so many different places for so many different reasons and so many different conditions. And that really served as the first question for the foundation of my research. The second, I asked myself as I was standing there is, how are all these people going to get along? As they move to Europe and they bring their own experiences, how are they going to get along in Europe? How is this going to look? And my background being in policy, I was very concerned in how was policy going to affect and shape this experience. So the research I'm currently involved in at the University of San Francisco is focused on social inclusion of Syrian refugees in Scandinavia, particularly in Norway and Sweden. I adopt an intersectional approach to examine the local, national, and supranational policies and how they shape the lives and inclusion of Syrian refugees, but also of the local populations and how they interact. And what I mean by intersectionality is an interdisciplinary approach that's multifaceted in understanding how migration and social inclusion occurs. Because you can't just look at race and gender or religion or economics when it comes to migration and social inclusion. You have to approach them from a perspective of interconnectedness and how they impact each other. So as I'm writing and thinking about my topic, I'm bringing in these ideas of intersection. And again, I keep coming back to my two initial questions of why so many people are moving and how are they going to get along. On the one hand, I think about, asylum is really designed for a small population, but yet we have this explosion of people. So I look at history and how in many EU bulletins and publications, they acknowledge the deep history of Islamophobia and lack of inclusion in European history, particularly with peoples from the Arab world or from the global South, and acknowledging that that policy and that public opinion have these deep historic roots, and that in turn they influence who gets to come to Europe, who gets to stay in Europe, and of course the integration policies. So in my research, I really try to think differently, try to see, well, how are these policies going to affect at a local, national, and supranational level, and how should they be interconnected? And I think also reflect upon the geographer Alan Craig, who in his books on European modernity and immigration, refugees, and particularly his work on Sweden, is calling for a disruption, a different way, a different approach to how Europe thinks of itself and how it thinks of immigrants and migrants. And of course, looking at the challenges of what he calls racisms. There's different types of racisms. And right now we're living in a time where COVID is creating these spaces and for change, because it really is laying bare the social inequities, at least here in the United States. The fraction lines that appear just within my own city of Los Angeles, within a 20-minute drive, you see such gross inequities. So the last thing I'd like to mention is that, working across borders, especially in migration, working across discipline, collaboration is critical for understanding and finding solutions to these core problems right now that COVID has really emphasized, not just in the field of migration, conflict, and war. This is where GRN is playing a pivotal role in providing spaces for scholars from all over the world to think together and to invite the public and policymakers to collaborate together in the production of policies and practices that are people-centered, by drawing from the knowledge and experience of local communities to be part of the process. Well, thank you.
Great, thanks, Anissa. And as you can see, our think tank themes and member activities range from histories of imperialism, colonialism, and racism to contemporary regimes of inclusion and exclusion, and the challenges these pose, including in relation to immigration detention, as Gabriela mentioned, as well as sort of broader ethical questions or legal questions or political questions around social inclusion, migrant agency, and political belonging. So hopefully that gives us a really nice basis for an open discussion. So I'd like to hand over to Matilda now to open that discussion and invite your participation. And before I do so, I see we do now have the poll working, which is exciting. So I'd like to invite you to nominate where in the world you're joining us from. And then we'll keep the poll open just for about 30 seconds, and then we'll share it with you all, so you also get a sense of the diversity of places that people are joining us from. So I'll end the poll in 5 seconds and share it with you now. So you can see that we don't necessarily have all regions of the world represented at today's meetings, but certainly in our think tank and in the Global Research Network more broadly, we are aiming to represent different parts of the world and also reflect upon the particular perspectives that then means people bring to the themes of the think tank. And so I'll hand over to Matilda to open up the open discussion.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to our members for your presentation. So we want to open the discussion, and I will ask you all who want to participate to type in questions, concerns, and comments in the chat function, because that way I will be able to pick them up, or to raise your hand digitally, and I'll look for sort of the hands. If you are unable to find the digital button, then good old hand can do as well. So as you've heard from us already, we really try in our think tank to pick up the local stories that make out the global community, and to make stories from all over the globe that are otherwise unheard, heard in a new forum. So with that, we really would want to hear from you as well. What kinds of questions and issues that you think are the most important currently in terms of war, conflict, and migration today, both globally and locally and in between. So let me see if I have any comments or questions. So let's go to kick it off a bit more. And we have another poll coming. Let's see if we can do that. So some of the questions that we have been discussing in the think tank, and that we are working on in different ways, are the ones that you will see now in the poll coming up. So if you can, let us know what you think of these questions. We'll keep it open for another approximately 20 seconds. For those of you who are with us on our live stream on YouTube, you are able to post your questions and comments there as well, and we will try to pick them up. And if you do post a question in any of those forums and you feel that we haven't picked it up, don't worry. We will save the chats, and we will be able to include your comments and concerns also later in our work, and perhaps push your particular question up on the global agenda through our research network.
If I might interject here, while we're waiting for everyone to fill in the poll and write their comments in, I wondered whether on the panel you would have anything to say about something that's been really bothering me recently, which was an item in the news about this man whose son died in crossing over to Greece. They were in a boat and the boat sank, and the boy died. It was a 6-year-old, I think. And the father has subsequently been charged under criminal law by the Greek government. I wondered whether any of you had heard about that and what you think.
Yes, so thank you, Yoriko. Does any of Baba or Anissa, Gabriela, Stacey want to respond to that? Anissa, please.
Yes, we were actually just discussing this yesterday in our cohort. How criminalization of migrants has now spread to Europe. In the US, this is very common, where a civil immigration case are typically treated under criminal law in the United States. And it's unfortunate that that's the direction Europe is going, especially with the new pact that's come out, the discussions on it, this criminalization of immigration and migration, which should be a civil issue, the means that they're using to deter migrants, by criminalizing them, and it's sending a very clear message to, stay away, don't come here. In the United States, the jurisprudence around it is extremely harsh. You don't have multiple appeals, putting children in cages as young as months old. So it's an unfortunate development. It's unfortunate that it happens, and if you just to oppose that with Ellen Cordy, the little boy who died and was washed up ashore in Turkey, and how that created this huge outpour in the world, seeing this child dead. Where we are now in 2020, where now that same scenario, the father is being prosecuted. So it just shows the dynamics that are at hand and how people are feeling and reflecting and what our policymakers are thinking is an appropriate action.
Thank you, Anissa. So adding just a very brief comment to that is that, so generally speaking in refugee law, there is an influx from criminal law in terms of procedure. So this has sometimes been presented as a way of making sure that there is due process and so on and so forth. But really, it's also coming with this slight criminalization of the entire process of being a migrant and an asylum seeker. So that also adds to the general theme of criminalization of the migrant and the asylum seeker. Now, you can see that our poll has got a result, and you should all be seeing it on your screens. So, judging from our poll, social inclusion, employment, and economic integration is an issue that we share not only in our think tank, but also globally across our meeting here today as an important issue, as is racism, xenophobia, discrimination against migrant, mass displacement, climate change, and food security. I'd like to pick up one of the comments that we have from the chat function, and this is a question for you, Stacey. So the question to you from one of our listeners is, would you be able to just elaborate a little bit more on the success stories that you are picking up? So for those of you who have joined a little bit later, Stacey, Dr. Stacey Johnson is working from Istanbul, and she has been able to do absolutely amazing work, ethnographic in character, really from the ground, which is what we really try to do here. And so, Stacey, would you like to say something more about the success stories that you are picking up?
Sure, thank you. So, success stories. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult with limited Arabic skills to access the people who I suppose are really affected by the multiple barriers to social inclusion here in Istanbul, in Turkey, for Syrian refugees. So, because I have no funding, and this is something sort of aside from my full-time job, I'm out here sort of on my own, interviewing people whenever I can, and finding participants wherever I can. So I usually find that I'm able to access, obviously, the English-speaking community of Syrians. So the people that I've happened to, this sort of the sampling method I'm using, sort of this snowball sampling, is putting me in touch with people who are really eager to share their story of sort of it sounds I'm here with $5 in my pocket, and now I have, for example, one of the participants has established a language school, a very successful language school here in Istanbul, when she originally came from Syria in 2011 with her brother, with about $10 to her name. So they're this particular group of people are very eager to share their success stories, self-defined success stories, if I may. Because they don't, a lot of them have already been involved in interviews with people about social inclusion and other researchers. So years down the line, now they're being asked again by somebody else, i.e. me, they want to sort of change their narrative and sort of almost give hope to other people who are thinking of joining the country. And a lot of them in their interviews have said, we really want you to highlights like what we would tell either our younger selves or what we would tell people who are thinking of joining the region to come here to work in the hope of gaining. I see that Dennis asked this question, Dennis Dulis, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I haven't looked exactly at the question of class in my research because it is very much work in progress, and all I have so far is the not even all of the interviews. I have more people on the waiting list who want to do interviews, which is great. I'm really grateful for that. So I haven't sort of applied any theoretical framework as yet. I'm not sure if I will put the question of class. Definitely now that you've mentioned it, it's got some cogs ticking, cogs going around. So thank you very much for that. And I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you, Stacey. Now we know that you are joining from a cafe and on a slightly wobbly line. So yes, we want to thank you for that. So if I understand it correctly, we have one of our viewers, Shahadin Al-Masri, who want to ask something or make a comment. Is that correct? Can I?
Hi.
Yes.
So it was actually on something earlier that was said, to be honest. I'm not really sure how relevant it is anymore. But it was speaking to, I guess, also some of the things that were just said, but on the securitization of migration processes. And what you were saying earlier, and also what I believe Anissa was saying earlier as well, on the boy that had drowned off the coast, was it off Greece, I think? And I was thinking about how this actually didn't just bleed into migration law and immigration law as well, and how it's also something that is very present in labor law. And I've noticed recently as well that even in countries with massive informal workforces, Jordan being one of them, this is what I'm thinking of, but also, I mean, you can think of Egypt, Turkey as well, in which the criminalization of informality is very often targeted towards migrant workers specifically, and that the laws recently, as these countries have taken more and more refugees, have become more and more hostile through the labor law. And so it's almost a hidden way to target people and to criminalize as well movement, because you don't really look at labor law when you're talking about immigration law, but it actually is a really sneaky way to also go and do the same thing when you're going and raiding a work environment, a workspace, whatever, construction site, let's say, and you're asking where are your permits, and then suddenly someone can get deported because they don't have a permit, even if they can enter the country legally. So I would also, I mean, it bleeds into even much, much more than the obvious, I think, securitized approaches to just movement and visas and whatnot. It's even when you're inside the country, how do they find ways to remove you in a way that doesn't even get you criticism because, oh, it's labor law, so it's not migration, you know?
Thank you so much. Maybe I was thinking, Anissa, maybe you wanted to come in there and maybe comment some more on the social inclusion issues that you have been working with, because that really rams that question, or what happens after one has crossed the border and what happens actually in the local community.
Yeah, you know, in the context of the Middle East, yes, this is very relevant. I lived for many years in the UAE, where that is a really huge topic, especially with workers from the subcontinent. And in the United States, this has been happening for generations, where we require cheap labor, but we don't want to acknowledge or provide a legal pathway to citizenship, where we continually look at guest worker programs. We really don't, since the Basara program, we haven't had something like that. For me, when looking at Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, the comments I hear from refugees is that, yes, they are supposed to enter the workforce. There has been a move and a policy shift to focusing on labor inclusion and worker readiness, in that you must enter the workforce. But there really are no real mechanisms to prepare them, and doesn't address at all the racism that they face. One man in particular who was looking for work. Outwardly, he looked European, but his name was extremely Arab. So he was constantly getting pushed back. Like here in the United States, someone would do a cold call, say, hey, I'm applying for this job. They say, great, come on down. And it's an African-American woman. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, the position's already filled. So you have this disconnection with one thing that I look at a lot is the approval of the credentials and also of the prior education, where you have someone who was previously a doctor, now is driving a taxi. And that's really the only real job opportunities that they have. So there's just this constant slow burn of keeping you out of society. Also, language acquisition. In Sweden in particular, it's very difficult for refugees to have access to native speakers so that they acquire the type of language that's necessary to be in a profession or to enter higher education. In Norway, they kind of had a workaround with this, what they call it everyday integration, and people are coming in and teaching, usually retired older women, teaching refugees in their homes language. So yeah, there is this criminalization of not only labor that's irregular for people who come in irregularly, but also there's also a portion of how do they enter the workforce in general. Even if you have documentations, it's very difficult. And if you are able to enter, it's at fast food or driving a taxi, maybe working in a shop. So that's kind of how it's been approached. And it is a huge problem in social inclusion. You can't have a job, you can't really stay there. And this, I don't know if you just saw recently in South Africa, the deportation of Africans from South Africa to an undisclosed location. And that law there doesn't allow refugees, migrants to work. And there are no refugee camps there. So they have to work, but they're limiting what they can work, the fields they can work in. So again, everyone's following what the United States has been doing, knowing that, like I said, we have to have this disruption of policy and laws of how we look at migration, how we look at refugees, how we look at these issues in a different way, asking different questions.
Thank you so much, Anissa. So moving along, I think that we are now at the point where we really would like to know from you all out there what you think that our think tank can deliver in terms, or should deliver in terms of future activities. Now, some things about what our research interests are, what the kind of questions that we do, and perhaps some of the interests that we have. What would you think that would be most useful and interesting in the future? So here is the activities poll coming up, if you would want to join that. So should we have more open forums, online topic lectures that could be by any of our members or invited guests, skill-based workshops, which is really not bad. Sometimes we need our skills to be developed and made better. Career monitoring, or anything else. We would be really interested to know. So we keep it open for almost a minute more. And you are most welcome to meanwhile ask questions or put comments into the commentary field, either here on Zoom, or if you are following our live stream at YouTube, in the commentary field, and we will pick it up and address it either here or include it in our work later on. So meanwhile, maybe can I invite Yoriko? You had some comments. Thank you.
Sure. This was sort of more general. It's something that I've been wondering, because I don't have expertise in the field, and perhaps the panel can answer this with your knowledge about the history of refugee and asylum law. So it seems to me that the policies today around the world are incredibly out of step with the reality of what's going on in terms of what we know about the power dynamics, about colonial history, about the push and pull of climate change, and the situation in terms of the global economy. I was wondering why it is so out of step, and whether there are, you can see anything coming up on the horizon in terms of sort of international level changes to, for example, the right to work for asylum seekers. That's just one example, but yes, perhaps Matilda, you would know.
So I'd also, thank you, Yoriko. I'll also sort of let in, because we have a question again from our audience that sort of leads into your common question, Yoriko, that has to do with decolonization and sort of the relation, because we are between the normal global north and south. So because we are a global research network, that really is the ambition of the network, to have scholars who are actively working and collecting stories and voices from around the globe. So that's the ambition. So I think Shahadin wanted to ask something or give a comment. Would you want to, you put something in the chat, would you also want to share it with us in the forum?
I feel like I'm talking a bit much. No, I mean, the thought, I guess I was thinking, so right now I'm doing a PhD in migration studies as well. I just started about a month ago. And I guess in just the process of doing that, I'm seeing that there is a bit of a dominance of a very particular dynamic, and this could be because the field is just emerging. That tends to happen when fields are new, and that they tend to be started in Europe or North America, and then it bleeds everywhere else. But I suppose, I think, because this is new and there's an opportunity to change that, in what sense can the approaches that are taken, in, I guess, the researchers that are involved, I don't know if you can go and change things, but necessarily, but as in be more self-reflective yourself as to why are you interested in these things. And I guess the question that I feel doesn't get asked enough is, why are you interested in this context? Because it isn't something that comes out of nowhere. It's not a vacuum. I'm interested in Jordan in the Middle East because I'm from Jordan in the Middle East, you know? And so I think that in some sense, I suppose in what role can also we play, just at least amongst the researchers that are involved, and being more self-reflective and self-critical of that dynamic that is very prevalent right now, especially vis-a-vis, you know, white researcher researches Middle Eastern or African refugees. It's very present. So I think that, yeah, this could be a space in which to have an honest and open conversation about that. Maybe not now, but at some point, you know.
Thank you so much. So I think that this is a fantastic point for perhaps an online lecture or a seminar later on from our research network. But because in preparing for this conversation with you all, the think tank, we sat down together and talked through the issue of positionality. So from what position do we see the issues that we are concerned with what right, but also with what voice do we speak when we do research? So what is it that drives us? So for many of us, it's personal stories really from the beginning. So from wherever we are, or where we have traveled or migrated across the globe, what we share among ourselves in the research network as it is now is this experience of exclusion, an experience of then having academia as a way of analyzing and actually making sense of the inequalities that we have seen both in our own experiences, in our personal lives, but also as academic working in different parts of the globe. So I think that that's really an effort that it resonates really well with us, and that we would like to bring forward even more in the research that we do and will do in the future.
I just want to comment as well. To plug a future GRN event happening in January, we're going to be addressing this. The program that I come from at the University of San Francisco, we're constantly being asked to reflect on our positionality, whether we are from the global south or global north, acknowledging as academics, we're privileged. So the speakers we're bringing in January are going to really be addressing this as academics and the participants in our research being co-creators of knowledge. And how do you acknowledge that? How do you think through that? How do you work through that? So the book that they wrote, they'll be presenting how that process can look. So look for that in January.
So we're also getting questions more coming in the chat function about, but how does this think tank work normally? What do you do internally? How often do you meet? What do you discuss? So we encourage you all to join us. So we're open to junior and senior academics from around the globe, emerging scholars that would want to join us in our think tank to add the stories that we together feel are important and lacking in the global debate on war, conflict and migration. So having a common forum where junior and senior scholars come together, not because we are academics and this is an examination or we're writing our PhD theses, but because we are brought together by the seriousness of the issues that come out of the theme of our think tank. So together we aim to change the global discussion, and we think that this can only be done by adding conversations that are grounded in the war conflicts and migration that are sort of ongoing in the world. So Yoriko is coming in now. We're also, I should say, drawing towards the end of our discussion. So Yoriko, please.
Well, I just wanted to jump in to say the final goal, really, in response to Denise's question, is for us to enact real policy change. And I think that as researchers, in a position where often, myself included, we've benefited for years, for up to a decade, from using public money to do our own research and to educate ourselves in various areas of law, international politics, history, whatever it might be. It does fall on us to contribute now and give back to society and try to fill that gap in the global policy space, firstly, between the grassroots and international organizations, and secondly, in terms of a lack of diversity in policy making. So hopefully you'll notice that this is not your usual panel of expert speakers. And secondly, we really do encourage you to join us and pitch in. We're hoping that with this space being being a place where there can be a meeting of minds, it will lead to collaborative projects that will then, some of the other think tank programs have been making submissions to government studies and so on, which will go on to hopefully form policy. So we're not purely an academic research group. Yes, yeah. So come and join us.
So I think that our hour is actually drawing towards an end. There's so much more to discuss and so many issues that we are still to approach and discuss both in our think tank and to work on. So we thank you all. So I want to thank all the fellows, junior fellows and members of our think tank that presented their work today. Thank you so much. Thank you all who joined on YouTube in our live stream, and thank you all who participated here in the Zoom forum. So with that, we say thank you and goodbye from all over the globe to all over the globe.